Hello, there is a very interesting transneptunian object called Orcus. You've probably heard about Orcus. And there are two things that make Orcus very interesting to me. One is that it's relatively large. So there are five objects that are larger than other objects, and they're an object when it's large it develops a round shape and it tends to do what we call clear a path. There aren't a bunch of other things moving in its path. And right now there are five objects designated as dwarf planets series. Pluto, which astrologers regard Pluto as a planet, but it's not quite as large as most planets, and it hasn't completely cleared a path in the same way as other planets have. So it's called a dwarf planet. Eris, Makemake, and Haumea. And Orcus may get classified as a dwarf planet soon. Sometimes people regard it as a dwarf planet. It hasn't officially gotten that designation. So it's relatively large. It's up in that dwarf planet level, and there are only five objects that have that designation. But there's a second thing that's interesting about Orcus, which is that it's a plutino. And plutinos do a dance with Pluto. And I was curious about exactly how this dance works. Is Orcus almost always exactly the same distance from Pluto? Like they're kind of like in a lockstep? They're just keeping the same distance, or does it vary a little bit? How does this work? So I wanted to see it, and I had to add a little new feature to the Sirius software so I could see it nicely. And let me show you the dance, how it happens. And what we're going to see is that Orcus does not stay at almost exactly the same distance from Pluto. It will stay on the same side of Pluto. Pluto is always ahead of Orcus. And more specifically, Pluto is always between about 50 and 150. I'm just rounding off, very roughly 50 to 150 degrees ahead of Orcus. So this little dance happens where Orcus moves almost to opposition to Pluto and then starts moving up close to it and kind of rocks back and forth with Pluto always ahead of it. And let me show you the dance. What I've done here in the Sirius software, I've unselected everything except Pluto and Orcus. I've selected 0 Aries houses so that the houses are not spinning around. And then I just go into, that's very easy to do, by the way. You just right click and check what you want. And houses, you just go to house system, select what you want. And now you just go into the astro clock. So I click on astro clock and I start the astro clock. Well, an astro clock is usually for watching houses and planets during the day. Here I've got two objects that hardly move at all. So my clock is going January 28th, and I'll speed it up even faster. And, it's going about a day a second. But of course, like on February 6th, February 7th, February 8th, it's going about a day a second, but for Pluto and Orcus, that's hardly anything. So I need to make it go super fast. So what I'm going to do, let me pause this, and I'm going to set the date to January 1st, 1600. So I just type in the date here, January 1st, 1600. I'll click on Apply Date so that we can watch Orcus and Pluto move over the past 400 years, 400 or 500 years. We'll just watch it move. And what we're going to see, I'll give you a sense of what to look for. You're going to see Orcus move up closer and closer and closer to Pluto, get within about 50 degrees, and then it will rock back until it's about 150 degrees. It'll rock back and forth, always behind Pluto, always, because they are in lockstep with each other. Orcus is a plutino, means it's overall going around the sun at the same exact speed as Pluto. So again, Pluto will always be ahead of Orcus in the orbit between 50 and 180, 50 and 150 degrees. The other thing you're going to notice is the planets jiggling back and forth as they're retrograde for almost a half a year. So what I do is I have this checkbox to make the animation go super fast. And the feature that I added, I think it was about a year ago, was to go 24 times faster. And now I've added a feature where this question comes up and it tells me click no for 1,500 times faster. So I click no, and now what's going to happen is the animation is going to go extremely fast. So let's watch it. I'm starting on January 1st, 1600. I'm going to slide this slider all the way to the right. And you see Orcus frenetically going back and forth. Pluto also frenetically going back and forth. That's because, again, it goes retrograde for almost half the time. So it's kind of going back and forth. Now, notice Orcus getting closer and closer to Pluto. I'll pause it. Somewhere around here is about as close as they're going to get. Let's see, 23 Gemini, 17 Leo. So that's about 54 degrees. So a little more than 50 degrees is the closest they will get. And now Orcus will start to move back away from Pluto until it's almost opposition, about 150, and then it will swing back. Again, Pluto is always ahead of Orcus. So let's continue the animation. Now I'm in the year 1700, 1720, 1730, 1740, 1750. And look at Orcus moving farther and farther away from Pluto. Somewhere around here, I don't know exactly where, somewhere around here, it's reached its maximum that it will get. Right now, we're at about 145 degrees. And I'll continue the animation. And Pluto is pretty much reached its maximum. I think it's now it's 147 degrees. Let's continue this animation. Okay, and now Orcus is starting to move back up closer to Pluto, very gradually. And now I'm in the year 1890, 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930. Every few seconds is 10 years. Here they've reached their closest, and they're starting to spread again. See, Orcus is moving away from Pluto. Now I'm up to the year 1984. So that's it, my friends. What happens is that Pluto is always between about 50 and 150 degrees ahead of Orcus. I was very curious about this because when you read about it, for example, in this article here about Orcus, in the second paragraph, it says that Orcus is a plutino. And by the way, Pluto and all of the plutinos are in an exact 2 to 3 resonance with Neptune. Not an approximate 2 to 3 ratio, an exact 2 to 3 ratio. Every time Neptune revolves around the Earth 3 times, Pluto and all of the plutinos revolve around it 2 times. It's a perfect 2 to 3 resonance. And the way it talks about it here, it says that the phase of Orcus's orbit is opposite from Pluto's. Orcus is at aphelion when Pluto is at perihelion, and vice versa. Moreover, the aphelion of Orcus's orbit points in nearly the opposite direction from Pluto's. So I was thinking that maybe when I plot this, I'm going to see Neptune and Pluto locked in a near opposition to each other, when in fact we see what's happening. It's wavering from 50 to 150 degrees. So that's the dance. I was curious to know exactly what the dance is. For astrologers, all of this could have implications for how Orcus affects us, if it does at all. I don't think we should assume that it necessarily does, but if it does, it probably has in some way a similar effect as Pluto, we could assume, because it is a plutino moving at the same speed as Pluto. So that's it, my friends. I just wanted to share with you the little dance, the Pluto-Orcus dance, where Pluto is always between 50 and 150 degrees ahead of Orcus. Just a nice thing to know. So there it is. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.